Korea, it's really nice in the sense that it's definitely a first world country. It's very developed. So I mean, it's not like such a huge culture shock in the sense that, oh man, this place is disgusting and dirty and people are very uncouth. No, it's not like that. I mean, there are certainly areas where you're going to find that a little bit, but it's definitely got a very good infrastructure. But obviously, there are definitely huge culture differences that'll take some getting used to. At least in the Daejeon mission, you were allowed to go to bathhouses. In Korean, they're called mogyotangs. And I was told about them before the mission, and for some reason in my head, I thought that it's going to be like a place where you could go sit in a hot tub with like a bathing suit or something. I was very, very wrong. I got there the first day, or that night, around 5 p.m. And then I woke up the next morning around 6. All the elders in the Pombu, or the mission home, woke me up, and we were running down the street towards this bathhouse. And the whole time I was kind of nervous about it, because before we even left, I was grabbing my swimsuit and my towel, and one of the office elders was like, "Elder, you don't need that." And I was like, "Why don't I need that?" And so I'm kind of panicking in my head. And so we were running down the street, and we get to the bathhouse, and I noticed they had these jumpsuits at the front desk that you could get. And I was like, oh, good, we're going to get these jumpsuits. That's why we don't need them. They're going to provide the stuff for us. And then the elder says, no, you're not going to use those either. And so then my nervousness and my fears just escalated. And so then we get upstairs, and finally we walk through the locker room, and yep, sure enough, everyone was stark naked. And I was terrified of that. The overall shock, I guess, because I grew up in a family where we were very, very private about that, and so the overall shock was very traumatic for me. But eventually, I got over that very quickly, and eventually, you just get over that, and it ends up being okay. And it was actually a fun experience, just because the whole Mogyothang or the bathhouse is actually quite fun. It's very relaxing. So the first week, though, was probably the longest weeks of my life, because you're getting used to working for 16 hours a day. That's just missionary life. But it's good work, and it's hard just because you're getting used to realizing that you're going to be doing this for 2 years, and you're going to talking to people and getting lots of rejections, and every once in a while finding little miracles here and there. And it was tough for me, just because I coming out of the MTC into the field, I felt like I hadn't learned anything, and just because my Korean was it was really very mediocre. It was pretty awful, actually. And so I thought I'd be a little bit better than how I was during the first week. But it was amazing to me, though, in the first transfer and the first 2 transfers, how much I was able to improve with being immersed in the culture in the country. Your progression accelerates because of that. As far as other culture aspects, though, I learned very quickly that a lot of the Korean culture has to do with food. Food is quite important. And so my best piece of advice, if you're trying to pick up on the culture very quickly, is when you go and sit down to eat with members, is to pay close attention to what they do. There's a word in Korean that you may hear often from members that I think is very, very important, and it was important to me in my mission. It's called nunchi, and what that essentially means is it's kind of like perceptiveness. Essentially, you need to perceive what people are doing, and it's kind of like when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Look at what they do. Look at how they eat. Notice how they mix and mash, and they share everything. That's very important, and that was something that I noticed and I tried to pick up on. Koreans do have a little bit of expectation that, especially since you're a missionary and you're going to be there for a little while, members are going to try to encourage you to eat and get used to Korean food, such as kimchi. So just be prepared for that. I would say that do your best to eat as much kimchi as possible, because they will ask you if you're not eating something, why you're not eating it. And so to avoid offense, I would recommend just be polite as possible and try to eat whatever is given to you. Daejeon is different from Seoul. In fact, if you talk to Koreans on the street, or if you tell them that, like, if you meet Koreans here in the United States and tell them that you lived in Daejeon, they'll be like, oh wow, you lived in the countryside. Even though Daejeon is really about the size of Salt Lake City. It's funny, just because Seoul is so huge. They consider it the countryside. And most of the mission has actually quite a lot of farmland and countryside areas. But granted, there are plenty of areas, though, especially in Daejeon, that have that very city-like feel. So you'll have a chance on your mission to see both, for sure. In Daejeon specifically, you have access, I guess, to a little more things that you probably get in the United States. So because they have a Costco there, which is really nice. It's not there's like 4 areas in Daejeon though, so you may not be able to get access to that unless you serve in that specific area. But you won't never have a hard time finding something that you want from the United States. There are obviously a few things that you can't get in Korea, but Korea either has something really close to it, or either has something really close to, or you can definitely find it if it's something that you really want. That was one of the things I really liked about Korea, is that I never really had a hard time finding things that I really wanted to eat. As far as day-to-day life, though, the Daejeon mission is a mission. You're going to get up at 6:30 in the morning. You're going to get ready and do your exercise for the day, and do your personal study and do your language study, and then you're going to go to work. That's how missionary work is, and that's really the secret of missionary work. That's how it gets done. Is you go to work, and then the Lord sends you miracles. And so, as far as wherever you serve, whichever area you serve in Daejeon, the experiences are still going to be similar as far as day-to-day life. You're going to go do missionary work, and you're going to meet lots of different people. You're not going to meet the same type of people for sure, just because if you serve in Daejeon, you'll meet the city people, and if you serve in the countryside or some of the areas outside of Daejeon, you meet some members who might have some rice farms, and so you may have a chance to do some service there. Obviously, serving in Daejeon, though, it's a little busier, so you have a better chance of meeting more people. So it's easier to get that 140 contacts that we always tried to push for during the week. And there's plenty of places to visit in Daejeon for sure. There's lots of cultural, historic sites to see that are really cool. At the same time, you're a missionary, so you probably won't get an opportunity to see a lot of those cultural things. You'll see, but you'll get to see enough, I think, to be satisfied, because really your purpose there is to help the Koreans come unto Christ. And so day-to-day life is really just having lots of fun and experiences, and emotionally stirring experiences, meeting and interacting with Koreans and telling them about the church. So one of the nice things about Korea is that because it's a first world country, it's still very well developed, even out in those countryside areas. That there's places to walk. They have a very good bus system. So the mission doesn't have at least when I was there, they only have like 1 or 2 areas that people or elders rode bikes. So typically, most of the time, you'll travel either in a taxi or a bus or walk. On occasion, when you go to zone conferences, you'll take the high-speed train. They have a really nice 200-mile-an-hour train that goes throughout the country now. It's really awesome. It's a super awesome train. When I was there, we actually took the slower trains because those are typically cheaper, and the high-speed rails actually didn't go to all the areas. But now I believe it's finished, and so now the high-speed rail can go to more areas. And so I actually, yeah, I got to ride I did get to ride the high-speed rail probably a little more often. Housing is pretty good in Korea. Chances are you probably sleep on the floor. Just throwing that out there. We have these foam mats that are about that thick. They call them, I think, yos, and they're fold-out mats. They're comfortable. Some areas they had mattresses. I believe there was one nice area up in the northern zone that had mattresses that were really nice. But nowhere where I served, we had a decent mattress. But I was fine. I actually once slept on a box spring, but that's another story entirely. That was not very fun. I eventually got replaced after I left. I should have called the mission home earlier. Oh well. But the housing is very adequate. When I was there, actually, they used to have some areas. They had missionaries stay in juteks. Juteks are little houses that were built after the Korean War because Korea needed a way to build cheap housing after much of the country had been bombarded because of the Korean War. And so they built these houses, cement and steel, and they were cheap. And the funny thing is, like, when you look at maps of these jutek areas where they have hundreds of juteks everywhere, when you're trying to find like a less active, it takes hours to find them because the way they built it was like they would build one house and they would spray paint number 1 on it, and they would build number 2 like on the other side of the lot or something like that. It wasn't built in a numerical order, and so when you look at the map, it just looks like this massive brain or like cauliflower of houses that are just bunched together with little paths going in between it. And so you're looking for one house and you find like number 60 and you're like, oh, it's 62. Okay, it's got to be close by. It's not. It's like on the other side or something like that. And so but because those houses are so old and they're actually kind of falling apart, the Korea has actually been going through and trying to replace those. So typically most areas now, the elders are housed in apartments that are pretty good quality, I would say. You won't have a dryer. That's something that's probably really important to know. You'll hang dry your clothes. So when you get back, the dryer will be one of the greatest inventions you've seen in a long time. That was one of the greatest feelings after getting back. I can have nice, warm clothes. So yeah, you won't have a dryer, but that's something that's not really that big of a deal. While you're there, buy some Korean ties. They make fabulous ties. Don't go overboard, obviously. Like they have ties that have huge rhinestones that are about that big on them. Most mission presidents don't like those ties, and they won't let you wear them just because they're not appropriate for the missionary attire, I think. And people, I guess, might think you're weird. But they do have some like little tiny jewel ties or sparkly ties that are just really fun. And they're usually really cheap too. Like we would go down to Gwangju, which is way down south, and there was this tie store where this lady worked, and she would let us buy a whole bunch of ties for really cheap. She probably got a lot of business from missionaries. We would go in there all the time. It was great. So I was really blessed to have lived in Thailand for 9 years, or have a lot of international experience. So yeah, I did spend 9 years in Thailand and my mission in Korea, and I did get to travel quite a bit while I was living in Thailand. They are quite dramatically different. Thailand recently does have a little bit. They're getting some Japanese influence because they're becoming a first world country, and so if you ever go visit Thailand, actually, I mean, you can stay in places that you can be quite comfortable. the government. My dad was working for NSA, and so the government actually gave us a really nice package. So we were well taken care of while we were there. Thailand, in my opinion, has probably some of the best food in the world. You can go. I mean, Korea has great food too. It's fabulous food. But as far as being foreign friendly and being able to eat just about anything, Thailand is pretty good. They have a few dishes in Thailand that I probably wouldn't eat or I would avoid, especially if you're out on the street. I be careful about going to the street vendors. You never know how that's been prepared or how sanitary that is. But on occasion, there are a couple that are pretty good. The differences between Thailand and Korea, though, is that I would say that, for one thing, Korea is a little more developed as far as their economy and their infrastructure. And then the culture is quite dramatically different. There's still some culture similarities. It's interesting when you go back in Asian history, a lot of culture and like a lot of their culture heritage and language stems from Chinese. So with Korea, it stems from a northern dialect, from what I understand. It comes from like a way up north dialect, and so Koreans actually share. I think they even might share some bits and pieces from Mongols, but I can't be sure. And then obviously there's some Chinese influence on the Japanese language, and in Thai language actually, the Thai language comes from Chinese, along with it's a combination of Chinese and Sanskrit, which comes from India. So, which is probably why their cultures are still, why they share some similarities, but why they're also dramatically different. Because Korea has a lot of culture similarities to Japan, which is very, very North Chinese, and then Thai is like Southern Chinese mashed with some Indian culture. And so like the feeling between the countries when I was there, it was very different. I saw a lot more Buddhism, like Theravada Buddhism, actually, specifically in Thailand, and where they wear the yellow robe, and they I didn't see many of the switched swastikas. It's interesting. A Buddhist symbol is a swastika, is like I think a turned or rotated swastika. And so I remember seeing that on occasion in Korea and being like, what? I hardly ever saw that in Thailand, but I'm sure it's probably there, and I just missed it. But Thailand, because it's much more of a Buddhist country, you see a lot more Buddhist temples and ancient Buddhist temples. Thailand has a lot more curries that are really, really good, particularly down south. If you go up north, the food's a little bit different, actually, in northern Thailand. My favorites are, I love the curries there, like Gang Masaman and Penang, and I like Pak Paprao, which is like this fried spicy pork. They have up north this thing called Som Tam, which is papaya salad. They have really good mangoes, so Thailand has a lot more tropical fruit, which is really good. Absolutely fabulous. Some culture things about Thailand is you can't touch anybody's head. That's very inappropriate. Don't know why. Like, I think it has something to do with their head is clean and your hands are probably not as clean. But I can't remember. But that's something that's probably important to remember. Yeah, like, it's not as developed in Thailand, so you're going to see more poor people for sure. You're going to probably be in areas where they don't have certain amenities that you might require or want, such as a functional toilet. I mean, they'll have that probably in most of your areas. I mean, granted, I didn't serve a mission in Thailand, so I don't know if I'm really qualified to speak of the missionary experience or about missionary housing in Thailand. But the people in Thailand are absolutely fabulous. I mean, they call it the land of smiles just because they're so nice and kind. As far as safety, though, I would be a little more concerned in Thailand. I've known many people who have had their wallet stolen because they were pickpocketed. So just be aware of that. There is a higher crime rate in Bangkok and Thailand. There's a little more violent crime. Typically not to missionaries, though. I've never heard that. One thing that's probably important about Thailand is you do not insult the king or Buddhism in any way. So, and I mean, and insults can run in a variety of ways. We had missionaries in Thailand sent home because they were climbing and taking pictures on a big Buddhist statue, and they were deported from the country and sent home. Don't do that. Don't take pictures of Buddhists or Buddha statues. That's very sacred, and that's very inappropriate, and you will get yourself out of the country very fast if that happens. So be very careful, be very watchful of that. Do not insult the king. He's actually quite a good man. He's done, granted he doesn't have a lot of power, but he's done some good as far as being an influence on the country. He's done quite a bit of good. So those are probably some things to keep in mind. Korea is quite a bit more developed in their a republic, and so they have a republic government. I heard a friend say that you go through all the emotions that the human being could possibly experience on your mission, from absolutely being elated because an investigator has accepted the commitment to be baptized, or is baptized, or in my case, some of the people I taught were sealed, and that feeling of knowing that they're going to be together forever, and that they have that in their lives was one of the greatest feelings I've had in my life. But obviously there was also complete rock bottom sorrow when I was teaching someone and he was ready for baptism, and then for some reason he couldn't accept the law of tithing. And it was like we were so close, and he couldn't accept that, or times when I just felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. And so there will be plenty of moments when you're on your mission that you will feel ecstatic and wonderful, and then totally miserable. But I think those experiences are those things that make a mission totally worth it. Because this life isn't about being happy all the time. It's about learning and about growing and progress so that you know what is good. I think part of going on a mission helps you realize that Heavenly Father loves His children, and that there is so much good in the world, and we are a force and a window to that. And while people may not always accept the goodness that we have to give and the truth that we have to give, that doesn't change its validity, or that Christ is with you every step of the way, as long as you are being faithful and doing what you can to do that. When I was on my mission, I got a really good piece of advice from my older brother that I always kept with me, or that I always kept when I was on my mission. And I believe it encompasses everything that everyone needs to know about, or what they should know, but before, during the mission. And that is to be a good missionary. Because when you are a good missionary, you are obeying the mission rules. You are trying to be like Christ. You are doing your best to be like Him. You are working really hard, or as hard as you possibly can, to bring the gospel to people, to the people who don't have it in their lives, or inviting those to come unto Christ. And you are doing your best to do the things that have been asked of you from whoever, your mission president, or the stake president, bishop, or branch president, and maybe even of your companion. That you're doing your best to do everything you can to be a good missionary, that you are an example to others, that your mission president can rely on you and trust you and not have to worry about you, that you're going to be a problem. be a good missionary. On my mission, I had a lot of experiences that taught me that of the importance of relying on the Spirit and relying on God, much more so than I probably had before. And so I would say that my mission taught me some really, really important skills that I really needed, and I'm very, very grateful for. And to anyone who has just opened their call to go to Daejeon, I will say that it is the best mission, and that you will be so blessed to serve if you are a good missionary. If you are a good missionary, you will be so blessed during the bad and the good times, and you will be a much better person for doing so. And I know it seems hard, and I know that when you're going to get the MTC and you're going to lie in that bed being like, I have 2 years of this, what have I gotten myself into? I promise that it will be a wonderful and life-changing experience that you will need and that you will reflect on for the rest of your life. It's a 4-season climate. It's a temperate climate. So if you've ever been out to the East Coast, it's very similar to that area, like Washington, D.C., Maryland area. It's very humid. So in the summer times, it gets around 90, close to 100 degrees, around 90% humidity. So you will definitely sweat. There's no way around that. My suggestion is that you buy some Dryluxe garments that feel very lightweight and they wick the sweat away, and they're very nice. But obviously that's your preference. So, but I would definitely recommend getting a good sturdy coat. I originally bought a Mr. Mac, and I had a few issues with that. It kind of fell apart. But Mr. Mac is nice with that 2-year policy or that 2-year guarantee. So just get something really thick, because the winters are also humid and very cold. And the difference between dry winters and humid winters, that if you've ever experienced them, they sink into you. It's a wet cold. It's way worse, in my opinion. So be prepared for that. Bring lots of warm clothes for that winter, and also be prepared for that summer. The springs and the autumns are beautiful in Korea, though. Some of the best I've ever seen. They are unforgettable. Don't try to bring too much, though. If there's a question on whether or not you should bring it, if it's a book, like, oh, maybe I should bring this, don't bring it. Just bring what the pamphlet says to bring, and only that. And just because, well, for one, you're going to come home with a lot more, and two, it'll make transfers a little bit easier when you have to carry all your luggage. I didn't do any Korean preparation before the mission, but it may help in some areas. Some books I would recommend is one by Hyungshae Daejeon. I'm not sure what it is in English. It's a university, and they produce really good books on learning Korean. But if you bought materials here, then I would recommend buying. Actually, I really wouldn't recommend buying anything. There's no really need to spend any money. The church has the best program to learn Korean. But there's no better way. You've probably heard that the classic dish is kimchi. And that is very true. It's eaten at every meal. You cannot avoid that. There's no way out. You can like it or you can hate it, but you will have to eat it. Kimchi is fermented cabbage. The way they make it is it's a different kind of cabbage. I think it's a Napa cabbage. Napa cabbage. I think that's what it is. But it's tall, with like a white base with the green leaves at the top, and they take it and they slice it in half. Take those halves, stick it in a salt brine. Take those halves out, slice it in quarters, and then they stick them back in a salt brine. And then once they've kind of fermented a little bit, they mix it with pepper powder. They have this thing where it's it's shrimp and salt water. It's quite salty, actually, but they're really teeny tiny shrimp, and they mix that in there sometimes too. On occasion, I've seen oysters, but that's pretty rare. But typically it's just the fermented cabbage that's spiced up, and once you get used to it, it's actually quite good. And a lot of their dishes is kind of are centered around that in such a way that you'll find a lot of dishes that are made with kimchi. So kimchi is not only a side dish, but they make like tons of stuff with kimchi. Korea, I think, in my opinion, has some of the best barbecue in the world. It's very world renowned and famous, and yes, it'll blow your mind. It is absolutely amazing. My personal favorite is probably, I really like dakgalbi, which is like chicken ribs, but it's like the meat off the ribs. So usually it's served with like hunks of chicken, spicy pepper sauce with little rice cakes and the cabbage and onions, and you fry that up like on your own. Usually when you go to a restaurant, you sit on the floor and they have a little burner, or like it looks like a pancake griddle actually, but or like a frying pan. Usually it's cast iron. It's in the center of the table built in. You turn that on, the heat under it, and then you fry your meat and all your stuff, and you eat it in like a little lettuce leaf, and it's really good. Samgyeopsal is quite a good classic dish. That's fried pork on a lettuce leaf, and you eat it kind of like a little lettuce pork burrito. There's a lot of variety in Korea, though. They eat lots of noodle dishes. My favorite in the summertime was this dish called naengmyeon, where it was basically just a bowl of cold noodles with kind of like frozen beef broth, and you could throw in some spicy stuff. Like it reminded me of mustard, but I don't think it was that exactly. And it had a few other things in it too. It was just phenomenal. I actually didn't like it when I first tried it, but the next summer on my mission, it was absolutely amazing. Bibimbap is also a classic dish in Korea. I would recommend trying that before you go. It's typically just a big bowl of mixed vegetables with a fried egg and some spicy sauce that you can pour in, and it's really good. Koreans love food, and they love healthy food, and a lot of their culture is kind of centered around that in many ways. When you eat food, just be sure to eat all the food that's given to you, every grain of rice, just because it comes from the Korean War when they didn't have a lot of food, and so food was so scarce to them that when they had it, they ate all of it, every single grain of rice, and so they still kind of practice that in some ways today. So, let's see other things about food. So their barbecue is great. They have lots of great noodle dishes. Kimchi is obviously really important. They make a really good kimchi stew. It's called kimchi jjigae, and that is just awesome. They take kimchi, they boil it with pork and sometimes tuna fish, and they put tofu and onions, and you eat it over rice, and that's really, really good. Probably the most classic foreign dish, though, that foreigners eat, or at least here in the States, is probably bulgogi. It's just beef with Chinese clear noodles and carrots and onions, kind of sautéed. Occasionally you can get mushrooms, but that kind of leads over to a different dish called japchae. But bulgogi is pretty good. It's kind of marinated in a really good sauce. You'll love Korean food. There may be a few dishes you may not like at first, but I promise that if you do your best to eat it, and you'll acclimate to it in a way where I guess your taste buds will change. I know like when I ate kimchi the first time, it tasted like food garbage. It was the worst, and the smell was so bad. But after about 4 weeks, I could handle gagging it down. I could handle it. After 4 weeks of just eating it, and about 6 months, I was like, this is actually not bad. It's pretty good. And after about a year, I'm like, hey, this is great stuff. And by the time I went home, I was like, I need to take this home with me. This stuff's so good. It's just, I guess it's a form of brainwashing, but it's a good kind. Korea is really safe. Yeah, you're safe in Korea. There's nothing really to worry about as far as violent crime or really theft. I mean, obviously, that doesn't mean like completely let your guard down. And I mean, I did have my wallet stolen once, but that was because I dropped it on a seat in a train station, and I walked out, and then somebody picked it up. So nobody actually pickpocketed me. So you're safe. Just, I mean, obviously you still have a presence of mind to keep your belongings where they need to be, and just be aware. But there's no need to be in constant panic, like, oh man, am I going to get beat up today? Or that never happens in Korea. It never ever does. No one is going to hurt you or do anything to you. Promise. So I've seen little girls walk out in the middle of like 9:30 at night to walk to like a 7-Eleven, holding hands, going out to buy something. That never happens in certain areas in the United States. I'm not even sure if that happens here in Provo. At least I don't know if I would let my daughter out, my 2 little girls out in the middle of the night. I might be okay with it in Korea though. When you're on the mission, you're gonna, at least when I was there, I don't know if the system's different now, but they gave us a foreign identification card. That was a card that essentially identified you as a foreigner. Make sure that you get that registered wherever you go, each area. Whenever you get transferred, you have to go to like this office and you have to get it stamped or signed, saying that this is your residence now. And you get in trouble if you don't. So I almost got in trouble, actually. So just be sure to do that, because that's actually quite important. They'll tell you to do that too. And if they don't do that anymore, then just completely forget what I said. I'm sure that when you get to the mission home, they'll tell you everything you need to do as a foreigner. So, the interesting fact about the Korean language is that when you go to the MTC, they will tell you that it's the second hardest language they teach in the MTC. And I believe the first one is like Finnish, but the second is Korean. And so I don't want to scare you with that, but it is the second hardest language, so it is going to be tough. But they've never sent anyone home, or they've never transferred anybody to a different mission because they couldn't learn Korean. That's totally unheard of and very unlikely. But that doesn't mean you're not going to struggle. Korean language, the language itself is it is difficult, but you'll get the hang of it for sure. The way it's structured is it's subject, object, verb. So instead of saying I go to the store, it's I store go. And they have conjugations and tenses, just like English. And I think that's probably where it gets tricky, just because remembering how to conjugate a certain verb can get quite tricky. The way it was interesting, actually, the Korean language used to use Hanja, which is Chinese characters. They used to use that about 500-600 years ago. And then one of the emperors or the kings of one of the dynasties around that time wanted to alleviate or solve the issue of illiteracy that was throughout the country. Just because in order to be literate, you needed to know about 10,000 characters. And that just wasn't feasible to memorize so many characters, or it was really difficult. And so he developed the alphabet. And so the Korean language has, I think, similar to English, actually about 20 something little characters that form together it's an alphabet. Yeah, so they made that alphabet, right? And then he made that, and it has about, I can't remember the exact number, but it's around 20 to 30 letters, essentially, that you can form together to make words. They have object and subject markers as well, so that can get things a little bit tricky. But to give an example, when you say the word I, that's che, or chon, cho, and then the subject marker would be nen, so cho nen. If I wanted to say that I know the Book of Mormon is true, you would say cho nen mormongyong을. So mormongyong is the word for Book of Mormon, and then is the object marker. So cho nen mormongyong을. And then he would say it's true, or or you would say no, true, no. So you'd say 참된 다는 것을 알고 있습니다. And 알고다 or 알다 is to know. And then the rest of that stuff that I said was the conjugation with the present tense. One thing that's probably really important with the Korean language is it has different levels of speech. So particularly with honorifics, you'll notice that especially if you read the Book of Mormon in Korean, or when you talk to people that are older than you. A lot of it has to do with age. So if you're, and also titles. Titles and power, positions of authority are quite important. So if I were to talk to like the state president in Korea, if I wanted to say hello, I would say 안녕하십니까. 안녕하십니까. And that's how he could talk to me that way too. But because if he's older than me and he has a higher position than me, then he would tell me, he would say 안녕하세요 instead of 안녕하십니까. That's how he would say hello. Typically, when you're on the street, though, as a missionary, you would just say 안녕하세요 to most people, just on the street. But when you're talking to children, as a missionary, you cannot use the lowest form of speech. The lowest form, you would say 안녕. So 안녕하십니까, 안녕하세요, 안녕. You would never say 안녕 to children as a missionary just because you're not allowed to use 반말. And that's the word. That's what we call the lowest form of speech. And you would never use that to anyone that's older than you. 반말 is specifically for Koreans to use to kids, people who are younger than them. As missionaries, you won't use that though. And they also use 반말, or the lowest form of speech, to like really close friends or family, or just spouses. So as a missionary, you always speak in middle form, and so that's when you would say 안녕하세요, or you would always end the sentences with yo, or at least most of the sentences in that particular conjugation. They have lots of honorifics, and so you would put that on certain object or subjects when you speak, and that can be tricky too. But you'll get used to that as you learn and get help from Koreans. Koreans are wonderful about teaching Korean. They love it when you try to speak Korean to them, and they love it when you interact and you do your best to learn their language. They take a lot of pride in that, and they would love to help you. 안녕하세요. 저는 캐머런 기기입니다. 저는 예수 그리스도 후기선언 교회 회원입니다. 예수 그리스도 후기선언 교회는 크리스찬 교회입니다. 우리가 예수 그리스도 그리고 하느님과 성신을 믿습니다. 저는 여러분들을 위해서 어떻게 기도하는지 대답하고 싶습니다. 특히 우리 교회에서. 그래서 우리가 기도할 때 우리가 하나님께 접속 이야기하고 있습니다. 그래서 우리가 기도할 때 그냥 하나님과 저를 그냥 이야기입니다. 그래서 시작할 때 우리가 하나님 아버지 이라고 합니다. 다음에 저희가 감사하는 말씀 이야기합니다. 그래서 하나님 아버지, 제가 저의 가족 위해서 감사합니다. 감사드립니다. 그 다음에 만약에 어떤 문제나 하고 싶은 것 있으면 하나님한테 이야기할 수 있고 물어볼 수 있습니다. 그래서 하나님 아버지 저의 가족 위해서 정말 감사드립니다. 다음에 저의 가족들을 축복해 주시옵소서. 그래서 다음에 우리가 끝날 때, 그 기도를 끝날 때 우리가 예수 그리스도의 이름으로 기도드립니다. 아멘이라고 합니다. 왜냐하면 우리가 기도할 때 항상 예수 그리스도의 이름으로 기도합니다. 왜냐하면 예수 그리스도를 통해서 우리가 하나님이랑 이야기할 수 있습니다. 그래서 제가 앞으로 여러분들이 기도하고 싶다면 이제 기도할 수 있기를 바랍니다. 안녕히 계세요. Little nuances, I guess, or little culture things that are probably important are don't bow twice. When you greet somebody, you bow once. Bowing twice means death. I can't remember why. It's been a while. Always pass and accept things with two hands. You'll notice, especially when they pass the sacrament, it's always done with two hands. I actually never knew the reason why on my mission, but someone tried to explain to me that it was about revealing that you didn't have any concealed weapons in your arm or under your sleeves. I don't know if that's true. I might be totally wrong on that, but that's what I've heard. So yeah, don't bow twice. When you're eating food, going back to food, don't take your chopsticks and stick it straight up into the rice. If you ever get a chance to attend a funeral in Korea, you'll understand very quickly why. Typically at a funeral in Korea, they serve lots of food on a table at the front or at the grave site. And they'll serve lots of food, and it's kind of like a symbol of their last meal. Or it's meant for the person who has died. And they take the chopsticks and they stick it straight up. So if you do that at a meal on accident, it means like the food is fit for dead. Or it's fit for the dead. And so that's very inappropriate and very rude. And I would very highly recommend you do not do that. I don't want to make anyone nervous about oh man, there's so many things I need to remember. The best advice I think I can give is just be polite as you can and learn as you go. Because there's no way that you're not going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes and people will get mad at you. Be polite, be accepting, and just move on. And just remember it from that time forth. And that's really the best thing you can do. There will be tips that you'll get from the mission president, or especially in Daejeon right now, they have a Korean mission president who will probably be very, very helpful in culture tips and how to be culturally appropriate or in Korea. So I would definitely take his advice. But just be polite, be Christ-like. When dealing with different cultures or different people. And sometimes it's actually, I found this to be kind of confusing because people are different in Korea as well. Like they'll have certain cultures, but it's kind of difficult to recognize, like, is this person, like if you make a mistake, is this person being angry because of the culture, or is this because of that particular person? And you might need to learn to differentiate between that, or not take it personally. But just be Christ-like as much as possible. I mean, that's kind of what missionaries we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be like Christ.
I just remember, when I first got to Korea, I remember coming into the airport, and it was funny because my mission president was late. He was about an hour late picking us up. And so when me and my district, we arrived, we came down the escalators, and we went to the place that we were supposed to meet. We were looking around, and we couldn't find, we didn't see our mission president. And, we all thought it was a test. We thought that our mission president was like hiding, and he was just looking at us to see what we would do. And so we're like, oh man, we need to start proselyting right now. And so, that's what we did. We just went out and into that airport right there. We weren't very good at the language. We didn't have a trainer. It was just, us. And we just started talking to random people in our really bad Korean. And, we could, coming out of the MTC, you feel pretty confident, and you're like, I know the language pretty well. And then you actually get into the country, and then you realize, wow, I don't know the language at all. But it was a great learning experience, and it was fun. And then eventually our mission president didn't show up, and And we found out later that he was just late. It wasn't a test, but when you're kind of new into the mission field, you're kind of like hypersensitive to all these different aspects. Definitely different. Way different, and it's a cultural difference. Food's different. Food wasn't so bad for me because I'm half Korean, and so a lot of the food I grew up with that food. But in terms of just the culture itself, like here, even though we have the mountains, like our buildings are very low. Like, but in Korea, even in the small cities, like they're large. They're just like large apartment buildings, and they're because land tends to be a little bit scarce. And so, like when you first walk into Seoul, or actually Incheon we flew into Incheon, and then we kind of drew by Seoul. You just realize how big it is. Like you don't realize how big it was. And I'm not sure the current population, but at the time, it was 12 million people, roughly the size of Salt Lake, and it's amazing. It's a huge city. But we were incredibly jet lagged, and I remember driving to the mission home and just wanting to take in everything that we saw. And as we were driving, all of us, we were all fighting to try to stay awake because we didn't want to be sleepy or anything like that. We wanted to present this front of like we're here to be on our mission. But I remember that we were really jet lagged. But once we got to the mission home, it was funny because you could feel the spirit of the mission home. And it was something that I loved throughout my entire mission. Every time we were able to come back to the mission home, with my first mission president and our second mission president that I spent the majority of my mission with, I loved coming to the mission home because it just had this spirit about it that just cultivated there, and it was a great experience, and definitely different, and just the little things, even walking down the streets, it's just jam-packed wherever you went. Whereas, here in Utah, you don't have that density of a population, and so there's a lot of differences. Obviously, I could go on a massive list of the different cultural things, but I just remember when we first got there, and one of the first things that I noticed was how big everything was, like how big the buildings were, and just how big the cities were, and it kind of, I've never really gone to a big city like that before, because I've been to LA and stuff like that prior to that, but never that dense and that compact, and so it did take a while. Korea is definitely more of a westernized country. Yeah, they really like to follow in American pop culture, and you see that pretty prevalent within the culture there, and especially with the younger generation. But in terms of lifestyles, there's obviously cultural differences, but there's a lot of similarities, even specifically here in Utah, like in terms of weather and climate. It's almost the same, and so they go through the 4 seasons and so forth. But they're a very emerging economy. It's not a third world country by any means. It used to be, but not anymore. They're actually very technologically savvy. There's a lot of technological advances that occur there. I remember seeing cell phones and stuff like that when I was on my mission that I didn't see it until 3, 4, 5 years later here in America. And so, in terms of some of their technologies, it's actually it's pretty advanced, And so you have a lot of the big name companies, like Samsung and Hyundai and those LG that are all based out of Korea. So, in terms of in that sense, it's actually very similar to the U.S., where it has more of a free market kind of approach, and where the economy itself is actually doing fairly well, especially considered to other countries worldwide. Yeah, I mean, there's a long list of cultural things that you tend to learn over the years. Obviously, even like now, like with me crossing my legs, you try not to show your the bottom of your feet pointed at anyone. Like if you're to cross, you want to cross it like down. But as you're greeting or talking to people, it's usually polite to, shake hands, but you don't put your hands on someone's shoulder or, approach, because they kind of have this personal space. And especially as you approach someone that's older, they have a very top down in terms of respecting the elders, and it's to like a hyper extent. And so whenever you're around the elderly or just anyone older than you, you show a lot of respect. And the way you interact with them is, even if you get to know them well, you still show that sign of respect. But yeah, just that's in terms of kind of the basics of the cultural norms. Obviously, usually when you shake hands, you do a slight bow. It's not a full-on bow, but you go and you shake and you do a slight bow as a sign of respect. If it's more of a formal setting, then the bow will be more pronounced. But in normal day-to-day interactions, it's still just a slight bow that they do. But yeah, you have Seoul. Up in Seoul, there's just so many places. Obviously you have a ton of Buddhist temples that are historically famous, and I served in a very small town named Namwon, and they have a very culturally centered place there. That it's more of a folklore, but it's all centered around this love story that occurred between this man and wife that occurred in this small town. But I mean, there's so many different places. But yeah, I mean, in terms of people from America, if they were coming to Korea, a lot of that would probably be up in Seoul, just because it's the main epicenter that you'd find there. So one place that I was never able to go, it was a small island that's off the peninsula. It's just on the south end of Korea. It's called Jeju-do. And it's pretty much a place that almost every Korean that I know, that when they go on their honeymoons, they all go there. Like that's where it's like a very, very kind of tropical, but it's very pretty, very scenic place that a lot of people like to go, that you don't really hear about unless you actually live there. Then you talk to people and like everyone takes their honeymoon to Jeju-do. They have a very different dialect. So much so that like if I went there, like I probably couldn't. I would have a hard time understanding, and so they have a very thick accent there, and so it's kind of the difference between, let's say, the U.S. English or American English and like someone from Ireland, or like an Irish accent, like someone speaking English that has a very heavy accent, where Americans can understand, and so Koreans can understand people from Jeju-do, but people who learn like Korean as a second language, it's very difficult to understand that accent because it's so strong. Obviously, there is an extensive history between the North and South Korea. There's actually an extensive history between South Korea and Japan. And if it's not so prevalent in the current generation, because they're a little bit more removed from it, but with like my parents' generation, my mom and her siblings, there's still a lot of animosity between the Japanese and the Koreans. And the North and South split is more political. It's not that the people are against each other, but like the South, the general sense that I get, when I was there, and that I know, is that there are a lot of people that would like to see, that kind of reunited, but they don't. There's just so much politics that are involved with the North Korean government and their essential stranglehold that they have up there, and so all of the friction and all of that tension it's coming from the government. It's not coming from the people themselves. And some of the people, obviously, they've kind of grown up into that culture where they really almost worship the president, or the ruler of North Korea, but yeah, I mean, there's that long history between the South and North Korea ever since the Korean War. It was very arbitrary. They kind of split down. They split it right down. I believe it's 46th parallel, but 48th. It's 46th, 48th. I can't remember. But, and a lot of South Koreans were actually kind of upset at General MacArthur at the time, because they felt that they could have actually pushed it further north, like all the way up to China, and then we wouldn't have had this split. But yeah, there's extensive history in that sense, but there's a lot of even longer history between the Koreans and the Japanese, just because there's a lot of times where the Japanese were trying to invade not only Korea but into China. But in order to do that, they went through Korea, and they've had many invasions over the years, and we're talking about centuries, where the Japanese would invade Korea, and because of that, there is some of tensions, especially with the older generation. But with the younger generation now, and especially the global situation that we find ourselves in, the fact that we're more globalized and we're not so isolated as countries anymore, you don't find that animosity as much with the younger generation. But I remember when I was there, they had the World Cup there. And I remember how livid that a lot of Koreans were, that they had to share the World Cup. It was shared between Japan and Korea, and they were just ballistic about the fact that they had to share it with Korea. And they had the opening ceremonies in Korea, but they ended up closing it there in Japan, and they were super upset with that. But yeah, it's very interesting, kind of that cultural dynamics that kind of play with that. So the language in terms of the alphabet and writing is actually very simple. They don't have that many characters, and the characters themselves are easy to draw. When I was in the MTC, I learned how to write Korean within a day. Like that first day I was in the MTC, because it's very basic, it's very simple. But speaking it, understanding it, it's actually very difficult, and the grammar is quite different. It's almost completely backwards from English. And so, but in terms of tips, it's the tip that I got when I was on my mission, that actually served well. That drives my mom up the wall, though, because when I speak, I kind of sound I sound feminine. And so I kind of speak like a girl sometimes. But the tip that helped me to speak Korean well was to imitate Korean women when they speak. And the reason why is because they enunciate their words very clearly and very well. Korean men, they just mumble, and it's hard to understand sometimes speaking to them. But yeah, if I were to go to Korea and were to try to pick up the language, and to try to sound more like native and to have better enunciation, I would definitely listen and kind of imitate female Korean speakers, because it's true, they just enunciate clearer and better, and you're able to. And the missionaries that I knew that spoke Korean the best tended to have those same tendencies, but yeah, and there's definitely just some. They have a couple of characters that we don't have. They have a lil, which is kind of a in between an R and an L. It's why Koreans have such a hard time differentiating between an R and an L in English. It's because their character is kind of like in between the two, but it's neither an R or an L. And so if you want to really practice on that, obviously you can kind of learn but really focus on that, because that's probably where an American who's trying to learn Korean sounds a lot like an American, because they can't pronounce that, and it's kind of hard for them to do it. So, but yeah, it's obviously it takes practice, and it just takes going out there making a fool of yourself for a while. But after some time, you're able to pick it up and move forward with that. So. So obviously, if you're just meeting someone, just like on the street, and in kind of not a formal setting, just like an informal setting, the way you say hi is 안녕하세요. If it's more formal, you say 안녕하십니까. But and as missionaries, you tend there's a high form, or a formal form that we always speak. And so sometimes it actually, with some of our investigators, it was kind of hard for them to get close to us because we spoke in this high form or this formal form all the time. And and it was hard because they don't speak that way. When as they start to build relationships, they kind of have this standard form. But as missionaries, you almost always spoke at this high form, especially when you're meeting someone for the first time. But then, and that's the way that you're taught. And then as you go, you kind of learn to incorporate when to use that high form and when not to, because there's definitely times where it's a little bit more appropriate and it flows a little bit better. Kamsahamnida is how do you say thank you, and you'd when you're introducing yourself, you would say John Huntinghouse Imnida. That you just that's how you introduce yourself, or in as a missionary you say John Huntinghouse Changno Imnida. And so those are just kind of a couple of the key phrases, I guess you would say. It's something that's impacted my life and how I go about it a lot since then. It was a very simple situation, but what it was is me and my companion, we were running to an appointment. We were literally running because we were late, and we were running about 5-10 minutes late, and we were crossing this large street, and the street, a lot of the things in Korea, whether it be stairs or buildings even, they're not very standardized. And so sometimes the stairs can be uneven as you're going up them, and the roads are the same way. And so in this particular road that we were crossing was very, it was almost like a hill. It was very steep, and then it was very steep coming back down. And so we were running to our appointment because we were running late. And there's this very old elderly woman, and she was pushing, I'm assuming it was her husband, but it was an elderly man. And so I would say they were probably in their late 80s or so. But I remember specifically, even still, 11 years later, to this day, that situation very vividly. And as we were running and crossing the road, it came to my mind for a second, we should help this lady because she's struggling. She was an older lady and she was kind of having a hard time going up this steep road, crossing this steep road. But I remember, we should stop and help her. But then immediately I started thinking, we're running late. I'm the junior companion. If my senior companion wants to stop, then we should. But, we probably should get to our appointment, and if she really is struggling, someone else will probably come in and help her. And, and so that's what ended up happening. We just continued to go on and we ran to our appointment. But I felt really, really bad. And it was something that just stuck with me the rest of the day and that whole night. And I just kept on thinking about it. And, I told myself from that point on that when I saw those opportunities to help, that I wouldn't justify myself out of it doing that, and consequently, as I've gone to school and stuff, we kind of learn this bystander effect, where we tend to not engage in those type of opportunities. But especially as missionaries, those opportunities are always present. And luckily for me, that happened very early on. It was my first month as a missionary, and I remember thinking to myself that it taught me a valuable lesson that I would never allow myself to let those opportunities to go by, and that I would take advantage of those opportunities. And mainly because, obviously I could, go back and, repent of that, and just make sure that from this point on, I want to take advantage of those opportunities. But the one thing that that I'll never be able to do again is to go back to that very particular moment and help that lady in that situation at that time. Once that opportunity passes, you no longer have that opportunity. Obviously you can move forward and vow that you're not going to let that happen again, which I did, but I'm never going to have that opportunity to help that specific lady at that time again. And so that's something that really not only served me well in my mission, but even since being home off my mission, and as I'm driving, or as we're going around when we see those opportunities, not only to help, our neighbors and those around us, but when we find those opportunities to help wherever we may be, to take advantage of those opportunities, because once those opportunities are gone, we no longer have those, and they're no longer present for us. When I came out of the MTC, I was, I don't know, I don't know if strict is a word, but I was very hard-nosed, super focused. And, I kind of grew up in a family that, neither one of my parents were active in the church. And I didn't really understand what missionaries actually did. I had my own concept of what missionaries did, but I'd never really been around missionaries. And so I had this notion that missionaries were serious 100% of the time, all the time, every day. And so I kind of came out of the MTC kind of that way. And, I remember just thinking to myself that, we'd be in the MTC and, we'd be getting ready to go to bed or something like that. And one of my companions would, say something funny or make a wisecrack. And I mean, it wasn't anything inappropriate, but, it was funny. But I remember thinking to myself, missionaries don't laugh. This is serious. We're on the Lord's errand. We don't laugh ever, and that's so inappropriate. And a lot of the times, and I would get offended when people would laugh, or, kind of be a little bit more lighthearted. And I remember going with my companion, and the first night there, I thought he was the worst missionary ever. I was just, I cannot believe I got stuck with the missionary. He was just as horrible as he was. But it was something, again, another one of those life lessons that I'm like forever eternally grateful to my trainer, my first companion, because he taught me how to work very hard, and work as hard as you can and get out there and do the work, but also enjoy doing it, and understanding this concept, kind of a broader application of that, being that, ultimately what is the whole purpose of our religion? Why do we go to the temple? Why do we go to church? Why do we read our scriptures? And I used to kind of take the standpoint of, these are checklists, things that I need to do. I need to get this done in order to go on a mission, to go into the temple, to eventually receive, be exalted. I have to do all these things, almost like a checklist. Whereas, the whole point of our religion is for us to enjoy ourselves and to be happy. Ultimately, the commandments we have and the rules that are in place aren't here to just make our life miserable or anything like that. It's so that we are happy, and it was something that my mission, and especially being with my first companion, really taught me how to do, how to understand that, the whole purpose of our religion is to enjoy ourselves and to do these things for, so that we're happy. And ultimately, that's why we, even go on missions. It's we go on missions. We go to church. We go to the temple. We do all these things that we do in the church because it makes our lives better and it makes us ultimately happier. And so that was something that I, again, will always be eternally grateful to my trainer for helping me understand how to enjoy, not only enjoy, do enjoyable things on our mission and, have fun in doing that, but finding joy within the work that we're doing, and understanding why it was fun to proselyte and to talk to individuals and not make it such a burdensome activity, that I have to go out and talk to people, or I have to talk to so many people, and all these investigators or so forth. But to understand the purpose, it's also to enjoy it, and to enjoy speaking. And as you enjoy missionary work, obviously you're going to do it more, and you'll be more engaged. And the investigators and the people you speak to, obviously, they can sense it. They feel it, and they know the difference. They can feel that difference when someone who is thoroughly enjoying what they're doing, and thoroughly understanding and believing the message that they give to them, They feel that as they speak with them. The mission is something that obviously has greatly impacted my life. Not only has it impacted me spiritually, it's impacted the way I study at school. It impacts the way that I understand and do things, and it's something that literally changes your life. One of the advice that I've always kind of kept with me, and that as I talk to new missionaries who are about to go on their missions and endeavor in that great work, which is missionary work, is to make your mission your own. Everyone around you is going to give you advice. Everyone, your parents, friends, siblings, say presidents, everyone's going to give you different advice on your mission. And it would be wise to, listen to all of that advice and take it in and see the things that apply to you and where, you could better work on certain things. But the one thing that I've learned is also understanding this idea that your mission is your own. And there are things that you're going to learn on your mission that no one else is going to learn. And understanding that the relationship that you build with and trying to understand and listening to the Spirit is crucial on your mission. And so if I were to go back to the day when I opened up my mission letters, or my missionary letter, and from that point prior to going to the MTC, one thing that I would really work and focus on is trying to understand how the Spirit interacts with me, and trying to understand the promptings of the Spirit. And obviously everyone's slightly different in how they kind of feel the Spirit and go about that. But I was so focused on little details, like trying to memorize every little scripture mastery and the verses and know exactly where they were and so forth. Whereas I was losing sight of the overall goal, which is not only strengthening the testimonies of those around you and as you interact with your investigators, and trying to bring them to the gospel, but it's also a learning and time for growth for yourself. And you learn how to interact with the Spirit and understand what it is that is truly important to you. There's always going to be times, not only on your mission, but in life, there are going to be days that just, suck. There are going to be bad days, good days, and everything in between. But on those days that become hard, especially when you go to somewhere as far away as Korea, that is as culturally different as Korea is, there are going to be times where you just feel extremely alone. And you just feel like that no one truly understands where you're coming from, and that's the one thing that I learned on my mission was developing that personal relationship with our Savior. Because it's true, there'll be times in our lives, whether on your mission or just throughout life, where you're going to feel that no one around you fully understands the things that you're going through, and for those certain situations, a lot of times that's true. No one's been through exactly the same things that you've gone through or the situations that you're currently in. And so developing that personal relationship with the Savior is critical at those times, because that relationship and that bond that you have and that you develop is going to be ultimately what gets you through those times. When you face those challenges where you literally do not know what to do next. You do not know where to go or where to turn to. The things that are going to get you through those times is having that faith and walking with that faith that you have in Christ, and understanding that He sees the beginning from the end. He knows what's best for us. He understands the direction that we're going. And as we develop that relationship and we follow the promptings of the Spirit, ultimately we'll follow that direction and we'll follow the way that our Heavenly Father wants us to go to. And ultimately that's the most important thing. And whether that be in trying to understand the best way of getting an investigator to feel the Spirit, or to ultimately come into the waters of baptism, or helping a companion who's struggling, or helping yourself when you're kind of in a lonely place or whatever. It's developing that and understanding that relationship that with our Savior that ultimately will help us get through those hard times. And so that would be the one thing that I would focus on prior to the MTC, because the language will come. The gospel, understanding the specific doctrines of the church and understanding the scriptures will come. But understanding the things that are most important, which is primarily developing that relationship and understanding that how the Spirit works with you, and understanding the promptings of the Spirit, are things that I wish I would have really focused on prior to going on my mission.